Josh thought he had it all: a loving wife, a beautiful family, and a future full of promise. But one betrayal shattered everything. The woman he trusted most had been hiding a devastating secret, and his world would never be the same. What would you do if your forever turned out to be a lie? Stay tuned as we unravel Josh's emotional journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and the fight to rebuild his life. If you're ready to join Josh on this gripping ride, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's dive in. Josh had always prided himself on being a devoted husband. Life wasn't perfect, whose is? But he worked hard to make Sarah happy. They'd been together for years, and he thought they were a team. Every day, he tried to show her how much she meant to him in 100 small ways. Josh would come home from work exhausted, but he still took the kids off Sarah's hands so she could have a break. He'd stay up late rocking their newborn to sleep, whispering lullabies while Sarah got the rest she desperately needed. He'd make sure her favorite soda was cold and waiting for her when she walked in the door after a long shift. He even put up with The Bachelor, a show he couldn't stand, just to see the joy in her eyes as she gushed about the drama. For years, Josh thought he was doing everything right. Sure, they had their struggles. What couple didn't? But he believed in their vows, in their family, and in Sarah. That's why, when Josh first noticed Sarah acting distant, he brushed it off. She seemed preoccupied, spending more and more time on her phone or working late. He told himself it was just stress. Maybe she needed space. After all, they had 2 young kids, a busy household, and all the pressures that came with it. But then one night, everything changed. Josh was doing the laundry when he noticed Sarah's phone buzzing on the counter. Normally, he wouldn't have thought twice, but this time, something felt off. Her screen lit up, and there it was. A message from someone named Mike. "Miss you already read heart," it said. Josh's heart stopped. His mind raced. Who was Mike? Why was he sending Sarah messages like this? At first, he tried to convince himself there must be some explanation. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe he was reading too much into it. But when he confronted Sarah later that night, her reaction told him everything he needed to know. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just looked at him. "I'm not happy anymore," she said flatly, as if that justified everything. Josh's chest tightened as he tried to process her words. Not happy? After everything he'd done? After all the sacrifices he'd made for their family? His mind flooded with memories of late nights comforting crying babies, early mornings rushing out the door to provide for them, and every moment in between when he'd bent over backward to keep their life together. But the worst was yet to come. When Sarah confessed to the affair, Josh felt like his world had ended. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, had betrayed him in the cruelest way possible. But even then, he thought maybe they could work through it. Maybe they could salvage what was left of their marriage, for the kids, if nothing else. Instead, Sarah made it clear she wasn't interested. She wasn't sorry. In fact, she blamed Josh for her actions, telling him that their marriage had been failing for a long time and that he was the reason she sought comfort elsewhere. And then came the final blow. During their separation, Josh moved out to give Sarah space, hoping she might reconsider or at least take time to reflect. But just 1 week later, he found out she had moved Mike into their family home, the same house where their children played, the same house where they had built their life together. Josh felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical, financial, and deeply personal. The woman he had devoted his life to had replaced him so quickly, it was as if he never mattered at all. The betrayal itself was devastating, but what came after was worse. Josh couldn't stop replaying the moment Sarah confessed. Her words echoed in his head, cold and detached. "I'm not happy anymore." What did that even mean? What wasn't she happy with? He'd given her everything he had, his time, his energy, his love. How could she just throw it all away? He tried to focus on moving forward, for the sake of their kids. But the pain gnawed at him, and the questions wouldn't stop. How long had this been going on? Was it a spur-of-the-moment mistake, or had she planned this betrayal? Josh needed answers, so he started looking for them. It began innocently enough, checking the household bills and receipts to sort out finances after their separation. But what he found made his stomach drop. There were unexplained purchases, expensive lingerie, new dresses, even adult toys. They weren't things Sarah had ever bought before. Not for their marriage. These were for someone else. For Mike. Josh felt physically sick. He realized this wasn't just a brief fling or some emotional connection Sarah had stumbled into by accident. No, this had been planned. Calculated. Sarah had been building a life with Mike while Josh was still in the picture. And as if that wasn't enough, Sarah wasn't done hurting him. Despite her betrayal, Sarah refused to take responsibility for anything. Instead, she doubled down, blaming Josh for the failure of their marriage. Every time they spoke, she threw it in his face. You never made me feel special. You didn't listen. You're the reason I was unhappy. It was like she was trying to rewrite history, erasing all the times he'd been there for her. Josh couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could she say he didn't care? Didn't she remember the nights he stayed up with her crying kids so she could sleep? The times he cleaned the cat litter, took care of the dishes, folded the laundry, every little task he took on just to make her life easier? Josh thought about all the sacrifices he'd made over the years. How many times had he left work early because Sarah was overwhelmed with the kids? How many times had he been her sounding board after a bad day, sitting patiently while she vented about her job? And now none of it mattered. The final straw came when Sarah casually mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Mike had already moved into their home. Josh could barely breathe. The house they had built together. The place where he'd kissed Sarah goodnight 1,000 times. The place where his children lived and played. And now Mike was there, sleeping in their bed, sitting at their dinner table, walking the same halls Josh used to walk. Josh's heartbreak turned to anger. How could Sarah do this to him? To their kids? She hadn't even given them time to adjust to the separation before bringing Mike into their lives. It felt cruel. Calculated. Like she was trying to erase Josh from their family completely. But even in his anger, Josh couldn't ignore the overwhelming weight of sadness. He felt like a failure, not just as a husband, but as a father. How could he protect his kids from this mess? How could he help them understand what was happening when he didn't even understand it himself? Every day brought a new wave of pain, and Josh wasn't sure how much more he could take. But deep down, he knew he couldn't give up. His kids needed him, and no matter how much Sarah tried to tear him down, he wasn't going to let her win. Still, the truth hurt more than he ever thought possible. Josh had lost more than his wife. He'd lost the life he thought they were building together. And he wasn't sure he'd ever get it back. Josh had never felt so lost. The betrayal was all-consuming, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't quiet the whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, humiliation, and disbelief. His nights were sleepless, his mind constantly replaying every moment, wondering where he had gone wrong. He knew he needed an outlet, a way to let it all out before the pain swallowed him whole. Talking to friends felt impossible. How could he explain the depth of his heartbreak without breaking down? So, one lonely night, in the quiet of his empty apartment, Josh turned to the internet. He sat down at his laptop, opened a blank post, and let the words pour out of him. He wrote about Sarah's betrayal, her lies, and the way she'd replaced him so easily. He wrote about his love for his kids and the heartbreak of seeing them caught in the middle. He wrote about how he had given everything to a woman who now acted like none of it mattered. The words flowed like a flood, raw and unfiltered. When he was done, Josh hesitated. Was this too much? Did anyone even care? But in that moment, he didn't care about judgment. He just needed to be heard. With trembling fingers, he hit post and shut his laptop. He didn't expect what happened next. By the next morning, his phone was buzzing with notifications. His post had gone viral. Thousands of strangers were reading his story, reacting, and commenting. Josh opened the app and stared at the screen in disbelief. The responses were overwhelming. Messages of support, words of encouragement, and advice from people who had been through similar heartbreaks. Some simply said, "You're not alone." Others shared their own painful stories of betrayal and how they had survived it. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. One comment in particular stood out. "Josh, I know it feels like the end of the world right now, but trust me, it gets better. You'll find yourself again, and you'll be stronger for it. You've got this." The kindness of strangers was something Josh had never expected. Their words began to break through the wall of despair that had surrounded him. For the first time since the separation, he didn't feel entirely alone. The internet became his unexpected lifeline. Each day, Josh scrolled through the comments, soaking in the encouragement and advice. He started responding, thanking people for their kindness and opening up more about his journey. As he read more stories, he realized something profound. His pain wasn't unique. So many others had faced the same betrayal, the same heartbreak, and had come out stronger on the other side. One night, as Josh read through yet another wave of supportive messages, he made a decision. He wasn't going to let Sarah's actions define him. He wasn't going to let her betrayal destroy him. Instead, he was going to rebuild his life, not for her, but for himself and his children. Josh began taking small steps forward. He started exercising, using the physical activity as a way to channel his anger and clear his mind. He reconnected with old friends who had drifted away over the years. Most importantly, he focused on being the best father he could be for his kids. He realized that while Sarah might have replaced him, he was irreplaceable to his children. They needed him, and he wasn't about to let them down. The healing wasn't immediate. There were still nights when the loneliness was unbearable, and days when the pain of Sarah's betrayal resurfaced like a fresh wound. But slowly, Josh began to feel like himself again. The words of those strangers stayed with him: "You're not alone. You'll get through this." And, against all odds, he started to believe them. Josh stared at himself in the bathroom mirror one morning, studying the man looking back at him. He hardly recognized that face: hollow cheeks, tired eyes, and a weight that seemed to press down on his shoulders. But there was something else there, too, something faint but growing stronger. Determination. It had been weeks since his story had gone viral, and while the pain still lingered, the outpouring of support had sparked a change in him. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was fighting to reclaim the pieces of himself that Sarah had shattered. He began tackling his life with purpose. Josh threw himself into being the best father he could be. Every moment with his kids became precious. He learned to braid his daughter's hair, even though it took him half an hour at first. He built pillow forts with his son and read bedtime stories in silly voices, just to hear them laugh. He took them to the park on weekends, watching their faces light up as they climbed and slid and played. But being a good father wasn't enough. Josh knew he needed to find himself again, too. One day, a coworker suggested he join a local community group for single parents. Josh hesitated. The idea of opening up to strangers in person felt daunting. But as he thought about it, he realized he couldn't keep shouldering this burden alone. The first meeting was nerve-wracking. He walked into the room and saw a circle of faces, some kind, some cautious, all worn by their own struggles. When it was his turn to speak, Josh's voice cracked as he told his story. But by the end, something incredible happened. The group clapped. They didn't judge him or pity him. They welcomed him. For the first time in months, Josh felt seen, not as a victim, but as a person finding his way through the storm. Over time, the group became a safe haven. Josh met people who understood his pain and offered him advice, not just on parenting but on healing. They reminded him that he wasn't just a broken husband or a betrayed man. He was Josh, a person with value, dreams, and potential. With their encouragement, Josh started exploring things he'd forgotten he loved. He dusted off his old guitar and began playing again, the familiar chords bringing a bittersweet comfort. He signed up for a woodworking class, crafting pieces with his own two hands and feeling a quiet pride in his creations. He even started running, letting the rhythmic pounding of his feet on the pavement clear his mind. But the biggest challenge came when he finally confronted Sarah again. It was a routine custody exchange, the kids hopping into Sarah's car while Josh stood by, steeling himself. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. For the first time since the separation, he didn't feel anger or pain when he saw her. Instead, he felt free. As Sarah turned to leave, Josh called out, "Wait." She paused, raising an eyebrow.
"Thank you," he said.
Her confusion was almost comical. "For what?" "For showing me who you really are," Josh replied, his voice steady. "For teaching me how strong I am. And for reminding me that I deserve better." Sarah rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath, and drove off. But Josh didn't care. That moment wasn't about her. It was about him reclaiming his power. Josh knew he wasn't fully healed yet. The scars of Sarah's betrayal would always be there, faint reminders of a painful chapter. But he was writing a new story now, one where he wasn't defined by his heartbreak. He still shared updates online, not for validation but to help others. People flooded his posts with comments, thanking him for his vulnerability and sharing how his journey had inspired them to take control of their own lives. And for the first time, Josh realized his pain had a purpose. It wasn't just something to survive, it was something to grow from, to transform into strength, resilience, and hope. One night, as he tucked his kids into bed, his daughter whispered, "Daddy, are you happy again?" Josh smiled, his heart swelling. "Not yet," he said honestly. "But I'm getting there. And that's enough for now." He kissed her forehead, turned off the light, and walked out of the room. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel so empty. It felt like a home. Josh wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he was ready for whatever came next.